Dean Martin was deep into the chorus of That's Amore, crooning to the packed house when he spotted the glimmer of steel. It wasn't aimed at his chest, not at that moment anyway. It was just sitting there, heavy and menacing, resting on a crisp white tablecloth right in the front row. The owner was a shadow figure, a man whose name was only ever whispered in the back rooms of Las Vegas, never spoken in the light. The song died in Dean's throat. The orchestra, oblivious or too terrified to stop, kept swinging. The entire audience seemed to inhale at once and forget to exhale. In that frozen moment, Dean Martin made a choice that was either going to cement his legacy as the King of Cool or result in a closed casket funeral. He didn't run, he strolled right up to the mobster and shoved the microphone in his face. To really grasp the insanity of that night, you have to transport yourself back to the neon-soaked streets of Las Vegas in 1965. Forget the corporate family-friendly theme park version of the city you see in 2026. This wasn't a place for kids. It was a kingdom built on sand and owned exclusively by organised crime. Every slot machine handle, every hotel suite and every cabaret show was greased by the mob. The Sands Hotel Dean's second home was practically a subsidiary of the crime families. Everyone knew it and nobody cared. Even the chairman of the board, Frank Sinatra, had to dance a very careful tango with these heavy hitters. The entire Rat Pack, Dean Frank, Sammy Davis Jr., Peter Lawford and Joey Bishop, operated under a strict, unwritten code of conduct. The deal was simple. You sing your songs, you crack your jokes, you keep your mouth shut, and you never under any circumstances disrespect the guys who count the money. Dean Martin knew the score better than anyone. He wasn't some naive Hollywood star. He was a kid from Steubenville, Ohio, a rough steel town where the mob was just another utility company. His own father barbered in a shop that doubled as a front for illegal numbers running. Dean didn't just meet these types of men later in life, he was raised around them. He understood their psychology, he knew their triggers. And he knew that in a shark tank like Las Vegas, the moment you flinched, you were nothing but bait. But Dino had a secret weapon, something that separated him from the rest of the pack. He possessed an absolute terrifying lack of fear when the spotlight was on. When he was up on that stage, Dean was bulletproof. It wasn't ego exactly, it was a genuine indifference. He didn't care if you loved him or hated him. He was there to have a drink, smoke a cigarette and sing a few tunes. If the audience didn't like his act, well, that was their problem, not his. That nonchalant attitude had made him a superstar. It was his armour. However, on June 18th, 1965, that armour was going to be tested against real bullets. The fuse for this explosion had actually been lit 3 days prior. Dean was chilling in his dressing room at the Sands, probably reading a comic book and prepping for the late show, when a sharp knock rattled the door. His assistant, a young kid named Jackie Romano, went to answer it. Looming in the hallway was a mountain of a man dressed in a suit that cost more than Jackie made in a year. Jackie knew the face and the blood drained right out of his own. "Mr. Martin!" the goon announced, stepping inside without waiting for a welcome. "Mr. Antonelli requires a private audience with you immediately following your performance tonight." Dean didn't even bother looking up from his magazine. "Tell Mr. Antonelli I'm feeling pretty beat after the shows these days. Maybe we catch up another time." The messenger's stone face didn't crack. "Mr. Antonelli insists." That got Dean's attention. He tossed the magazine onto the sofa, slowly rose to his feet and walked over until he was nose to nose with the intruder. "You go back and tell Mr. Antonelli that Dean Martin doesn't take meetings with errand boys or messengers. If he wants to have a chat with me, he can walk down here to my dressing room himself and ask like a gentleman." The heavy stared at Dean for a long, tense silence, trying to intimidate him. Then he gave a slow nod. "I'll make sure he gets the message." As soon as the door clicked shut, Jackie started trembling. "Dean, are you crazy? Do you know who that was? That was one of Vincent Antonelli's guys." "Vincent Antonelli, Dean. You can't just blow off a guy like that." Dean just shrugged, poured himself a drink and picked his magazine back up. "I can, and I just did. Listen, kid, I don't work for the mob. I work for the Sands Hotel, and the last time I checked the marquee, I'm the one packing this joint every night, not Vincent Antonelli." Jackie tried to get through to him. Vincent Antonelli wasn't just some low-level bookie connected to the outfit. He was one of the most terrifying enforcers in the entire Nevada crime syndicate. This was a man with a reputation for extreme violence that made other gangsters uncomfortable. Street legend had it he was tied to at least a dozen disappearances, though the cops could never make anything stick. When a guy like Vincent Antonelli summoned you, you showed up, period. But Dean Martin simply wasn't interested in playing by those rules. He had dealt with tough guys and bullies his entire life. He learned on the streets of Ohio that if you show a predator even a hint of fear, you're finished. So he refused to be afraid. He just went about his business as if nothing happened. The next night, June 16th, Dean crushed his usual set. Afterwards, he was unwinding when the same messenger materialised at his dressing room door. Mr. Antonelli is waiting downstairs. He would like to speak with you right now. Dean was in the middle of untying his bow tie, looking bored. Tell Mr. Antonelli I've already left for the night. The goon blinked. But Mr. Martin, you are standing right here. Am I? Dean grinned that famous lazy smile. I could have sworn I left 10 minutes ago. The messenger's jaw clenched tight. Mr. Martin, I don't think you understand the situation. Dean's smile vanished. No, pal, I understand perfectly. Dean cut him off, voice low and steady. I understand that I just worked my tail off for 2 hours making people happy. I understand that I'm exhausted, and I understand that I'm going to my suite to have a scotch and go to bed. Now you can stand there and argue with a tired man, or you can go deliver my message to your boss. It's your call. The messenger turned on his heel and left without a sound. Jackie was beside himself with panic. Dean, you're literally going to get yourself killed. You have to call Frank. He knows these guys. He can fix this. He can smooth this over before it gets out of hand. But Dean shook his head, refusing to budge. I am not dragging Frank into my mess. And I am certainly not meeting with some thug who thinks he can snap his fingers and watch me jump. I'm Dean Martin. I don't run for anybody. On June 17th, just 24 hours before the chaos erupted, the Whisper network at the Sands was on fire. Word on the street was that Vincent Antonelli wasn't just annoyed, he was absolutely livid. The casino pit bosses guys who knew exactly who pulled the strings in this town started pulling Dean's crew aside. Their message was quiet but terrifyingly clear. Dean needed to bury the hatchet with Antonelli or things were going to get ugly fast. But Dean, he wasn't budging. He flat out refused to sit down with the guy. Later that evening, his manager, Herman Citron, burst into the dressing room looking like he was about to have a coronary. Dean, please, I am on my knees here. Herman pleaded, wiping sweat from his brow. Just give him 5 minutes. Sit down, have a drink, smooth it over. Dean just sipped his drink and asked, what is his problem anyway? What does the guy want? Herman paused, looking nervous. I'm not 100% sure on the details, but the word is it involves his Gumar. You know his girl. She's dancing over at the Tropicana right now. Rumour has it she's been yapping about packing her bags and heading to Hollywood to be a star. Vincent has got it in his head that you're the one filling her head with these ideas and telling her to skip town. Dean threw his head back and laughed. Are you kidding me? I've never even laid eyes on the broad. I wouldn't know her if she walked in here right now. The guy is delusional. Dean, listen to me. The truth doesn't mean squat in this town. Herman said, his voice cracking with desperation. If Vincent believes it, that's as good as fact. You have to meet him. Just say you're sorry. Tell him you'll never look in her direction again. Tell him whatever he needs to hear so we don't end up in the desert. But Dean dug his heels in. I'm not apologising for a sin I didn't commit, Dean snapped, losing his smile. If Antonelli has a beef with me, he can walk through that door and tell me face to face like a man instead of sending errand boys and vague threats. Herman walked out of the dressing room, shaking his head in defeat. He looked like a man walking away from a car crash before it happened. He knew Dean better than anyone. Once the King of Cool made a decision, that was it. There was no turning back. Herman also knew that by refusing this meeting, the temperature in Vegas was about to hit a boiling point. It all went down on June 18th, 1965. That was the day the levee broke. Dean rolled up to the Sands around 6 in the evening to prep for his 9 o'clock headline slot. You could cut the tension in the hotel lobby with a knife. The staff weren't their usual bubbly selves. They were whispering in corners. Even the security guards looked twitchy, scanning the floor like they were expecting a war to break out. Everyone knew something was going down, but nobody had the guts to say it out loud. Then at 8:30, just 30 minutes before Kurt and Jackie rushed into Dean's room, looking white as a sheet. "Dean, you've got to pull the plug," Jackie stammered. "We need to cancel tonight's show right now." Dean frowned. "Why on earth would I do that?" Jackie swallowed hard. "Because Vincent Antonelli just bought out the entire first 3 rows. It's him and about 20 of his toughest soldiers. They are sitting out there right now, staring at the empty stage, just waiting for you to walk out." Dean didn't even flinch. He kept fixing his bow tie in the vanity mirror, cool as a cucumber. "So they paid for the seats, right? Their money is green." That makes them paying customers, just like the tourists from Ohio. "Dean, stop playing around. This isn't a comedy bit. Those guys aren't here to hear you sing Volare. They are here to publicly humiliate you, or worse, they're sending a message." Dean finally stopped fidgeting with his tie. He turned around, looked Jackie dead in the eye and flashed that famous smirk. "Well then, pal, I guess I better go out there and give them the best damn show of their lives." At 9 o'clock sharp, the lights went down and Dean Martin strolled onto the stage of the Copa Room. The place was jammed to the rafters, 2,800 people. But the vibe wasn't the usual party atmosphere. It was electric, but dangerous. There was a heavy, suffocating tension hanging over the room. Even the civilians in the back could sense that something was very, very wrong tonight. Dean looked out over the footlights and spotted them immediately. It was impossible to miss. The first 3 rows were a wall of black suits, stone-faced and silent amidst the cheering crowd. And right there, sitting dead centre, in the front row like a king on a throne, was Vincent Antonelli. He was positioned directly in Dean's line of sight. He was a mountain of a man, tipping the scales at easily 250 pounds. His face looked like a road map of bad decisions and street fights. His eyes were icy, devoid of emotion, and they were locked onto Dean like a predator watching prey. Dean didn't blink. He flashed his $1,000,000 smile at the darkness. "Good evening, ladies and gentlemen. Welcome to the beautiful Sands Hotel. We have got a spectacular show lined up for you tonight. I'm going to sing a little drink, maybe tell a few jokes, and if we're lucky, we'll all make it out of here having a wonderful time." He gave a subtle nod to the conductor and the brass section kicked into high gear with the opening notes of "Ain't That a Kick in the Head?" Dean slid across the stage with that signature liquid grace holding the mic stand like a dance partner. But no matter where he moved, his eyes kept flickering back to the massive figure in the front row. Antonelli was a statue. He didn't clap, he didn't smile, he just stared. When Dean hit the final note, the room erupted in applause everywhere except those first 3 rows, which remained a silent black void. Thank you very much," Dean purred into the microphone, soaking up the love from the back of the room. "You're too kind, really. Although I couldn't help but notice that some of our friends down here in the front seem a little shy tonight. But hey, don't worry about it. I won't take it personally. I know how hard it is to clap when your hands are busy holding on to grudges." A ripple of nervous laughter moved through the crowd, but it died out quickly. The joke landed with a thud in the front section. The men didn't even twitch. Vincent Antonelli's expression remained frozen, a mask of pure intimidation. Dean decided to keep it moving and segued into "Memories are made of this." He was cruising through the second verse when suddenly Vincent Antonelli reached his hand inside his dinner jacket. Dean saw the motion and his heart must have skipped a beat. His voice caught in his throat for a split second, but Antonelli wasn't drawing a pistol. Instead, he slowly pulled out a silver cigarette case. He took his sweet time lighting it, the flame illuminating his hard face, all while never breaking eye contact with the singer. Then Antonelli did something that sucked the oxygen right out of the Copa Room. He made a hand signal. It was small, it was subtle, but in the world of the mob, it was louder than a cannon blast. With slow, deliberate malice, he drew his index finger across his throat. Dean saw it clearly. The band members froze. The civilians at the nearby tables gasped. A terrified murmur rippled through the audience like a wave. Dean stopped singing mid-lyric. The orchestra tried to keep going for another measure or two, but eventually the music stumbled and trailed off into an awkward, heavy silence. Dean stood alone at centre stage, the spotlight beaming down on him, staring right back at Vincent Antonelli. The room was dead quiet. You could hear a pin drop. 2,800 people were holding their breath, waiting for a gunshot. The tension was unbearable, and then Dean Martin did the one thing absolutely nobody in that room expected him to do. He smiled. "Folks, we are going to take a little detour from the set list for a second," Dean announced, his voice steady. "You see, there is a gentleman right here in the front row who seems like he has something heavily weighing on his mind that he wants to share. And you know me, I am a man of the people. I'm all about giving a guy a fair chance to speak his piece and express himself to the group." With the microphone in hand, Dean started walking to the very edge of the stage, looming over the mob boss. The audience was terrified. Vincent Antonelli sat perfectly still, but his eyes narrowed into dangerous slits. Dean sauntered right up to the very edge of the stage, looking cool as a cucumber, and gazed down at the heavy hitter sitting front and centre. "Hey, pal, I couldn't help but notice you've been parked there making hand signals at me all evening long. Now, I'm a little fuzzy on the details. I can't tell if you're trying to send me a secret code or if you're just getting some practice in for your sign language exam. But either way, it's getting a little hard to ignore up here." The atmosphere in the room instantly froze. It was the kind of silence where you could hear a pin drop on the carpet. Waiters stopped pouring and nobody even dared to exhale. Dean didn't flinch. He just kept that smooth smile and continued. "So here's the idea I'm tossing around. If you've got something so important to broadcast, why don't you hop up here and say it into the mic?" To prove he wasn't bluffing, Dean actually crouched down at the lip of the stage, right in the guy's face, and extended the microphone out toward Vincent Antonelli like a peace offering. "Come on, why don't you belt out a tune? You look like a guy with a set of pipes. What do you say you want to make your debut?" Vincent Antonelli just locked eyes with Dean, staring a hole right through him. The mobster's face was a stone wall, absolutely unreadable, but everybody in Vegas knew that look. It was the calm before the storm, the most dangerous split second in the room. This was the exact moment where Vincent Antonelli would decide if you were going to wake up tomorrow morning or not. The silence dragged on, feeling heavier and longer than a life sentence. Every single person in the showroom was holding their breath, waiting for the explosion. And then something completely unexpected broke the tension. Vincent Antonelli started to chuckle. It wasn't a warm, happy sound. It was a dry, menacing rattle that came from deep in his chest. It was cold and calculating, but technically the guy was laughing. He looked up at Dean Martin, who was still kneeling there with that fearless grin, holding the mic out like he didn't have a care in the world. And the mob boss actually cracked a smile. "You got some serious stones," Martin Antonelli boomed, his gravelly voice cutting through the quiet room like a knife. "I'll give you credit for that much." Dean just widened his smile. "Does that mean you're accepting the invite? Because I gotta warn you, the sound system up here is top notch. If you're gonna sing, you better bring your A game." Antonelli shook his head slowly, that shark-like grin never leaving his face. "Nah, forget it. You stick to the singing, Dean. That seems to be the only thing you're good for." Dean stood up, dusting off his knees. "You absolutely sure the offer doesn't expire? Whenever you feel the urge to steal the spotlight, you just give me the signal." "I'm sure," Antonelli replied, leaning back in his chair. Then, almost like he was tossing a crumb to a pigeon, he added, "You just keep doing your thing, Dean. You're all right in my book." Dean gave him a respectful nod, turned on his heel and casually strolled back to the microphone stand at centre stage. He gripped the stand, looked out at the terrified crowd and quipped, "Well, folks, it looks like I'm going to have to carry the rest of this show solo. No guest stars tonight. But before we get back to the music, let's hear it for my friend down here in the front row. He's a tough critic to please, but you got to admit, he's fair." The audience, still trying to process that they hadn't just witnessed a murder, clapped nervously. Vincent Antonelli raised his scotch glass in the air, offering a mock toast to the singer. Dean slid right back into his routine without missing a beat. For the next hour, he crooned and cracked jokes with that effortless charm, acting like he hadn't just stared death in the face. Vincent Antonelli and his crew of wise guys sat through the whole set, and when the curtain finally fell, they stood up and applauded right along with the tourists. Later that night, Dean was unwinding in his dressing room when a heavy knock rattled the door. His assistant Jackie opened it, and there stood Vincent Antonelli solo, this time no bodyguards in sight. "You got a minute?" Antonelli grunted. Dean didn't hesitate, giving a quick nod. Absolutely. Come on in. Can I fix you a drink? Antonelli stepped inside, shutting the door firmly behind him. Yeah, make it a scotch if you have it. Dean poured 2 stiff drinks and handed one to the man who ran the city. They stood in the small room for a beat, sizing each other up in the quiet. Finally, Antonelli broke the silence. You have any idea why I came looking for you tonight? I heard rumours it was about a dancer, Dean ventured. Antonelli nodded. My girl. She's been running her mouth about ditching Vegas and heading to Hollywood to be a star. I got it in my head that maybe you were the one filling her head with those dreams. I got to be honest, Vincent, I don't even know who your girl is. Dean said flatly. Yeah, I figured that out, Antonelli replied, taking a sip. Turns out she was chatting up some other guy, a casting agent type. Let's just say the problem has been handled. Dean didn't ask for clarification on what handled meant in this town that was code for something you didn't want to be a witness to, so he just let it slide. Antonelli took another long pull of his scotch. But here's the real issue. I sent one of my guys to have a chat with you 3 separate times, and 3 times you blew him off. That made me look weak in front of my crew. I can't have people thinking I'm soft. So you came to my show to what spooked me, Dean asked, leaning against the vanity. Antonelli smirked. Something along those lines. But you didn't flinch, did you? I don't scare all that easy. Dean replied coolly. No, evidently you don't. Antonelli drained his glass and slammed it down on the table. Here's the bottom line, Martin. I respect what you pulled out there tonight. Most guys would have wet their pants if I made that throat-slashing gesture at them, but you walked right up to my face and tried to hand me a microphone. That takes a serious set of guts. Or maybe just pure stupidity, Dean countered, with a lopsided grin. Probably a mix of both. Antonelli stuck out a massive hand. We're square, Dean. You and me were good. You didn't cross the line and I got respect for a man who holds his ground. Dean took the hand and shook it firmly. I appreciate that, Vincent. Antonelli turned to leave hand on the doorknob, then paused and looked back. But, hey, Dean, next time I send a guy to talk to you, maybe don't make him come back 3 times, all right? You got a deal. Deal. And just like that, the tension evaporated from the room. Vincent Antonelli walked out into the night and Dean Martin breathed a sigh of relief, having survived what could have easily been his final performance. But the ripple effects didn't stop there. The story of what went down at the Sands spread across Las Vegas faster than a winning streak at the craps table. By the time the sun came up, everybody in showbiz knew the details. Dean Martin had gone toe-to-toe with Vincent Antonelli, and he hadn't just walked away with his life, he'd walked away with the boss's respect. That single incident shifted the entire power dynamic between the mob and the entertainers on the strip. Before that night, singers and comedians were viewed as nothing more than hired help, disposable assets you could push around. But Dean proved that a performer with enough charisma and backbone could command respect from even the most terrifying figures in the underworld, changing the rules of the game forever. Word travelled fast in Vegas, and by the next morning, Frank Sinatra was on the phone, his voice laced with panic. "Have you completely lost your mind?" Frank demanded before even saying hello. "Do you have any idea what a guy like Antonelli could have done to you? He could have buried you in the desert, Dean. He has done a lot worse for a lot less. Why in the world would you provoke him like that? Why didn't you just take the meeting when he asked for it?" I paused for a beat, letting the question hang in the air while I poured a morning drink. Because, Frank, if I came running the very first time he snapped his fingers, I would be running errands for him for the rest of my life. You know how these wise guys operate. They respect strength, not compliance. You know the rules as well as I do. The second you show a crack in the armour, the moment you show weakness, they own you. I simply refused to let him see me sweat. The line went dead silent for a long moment before Frank burst into laughter. "You crazy son of a gun! You are either the bravest man I have ever met or the absolute dumbest. I honestly cannot figure out which one it is. Maybe it is a little bit of both," Dean quipped, repeating the exact line he had tossed at Antonelli. As the years rolled on, the tale of that standoff at the Sands took on a life of its own, becoming pure folklore. As the story passed from person to person, the details got wilder. Some folks swore up and down that Dean had actually pulled a snub-nosed revolver from his tuxedo during the argument. Others claimed that Antonelli had stormed the stage ready to throw punches and that Dean had rolled up his sleeves to fight him right there under the spotlight. Of course, none of those Hollywood-style exaggerations were true, but they showed just how deeply the incident captured the public's imagination. The reality was much quieter, but in my opinion, far more impressive. Dean Martin had stood toe-to-toe with a cold-blooded killer armed with absolutely nothing but his microphone, his scotch, and his unshakable charisma. He had flat out refused to be bullied in his own house, and by holding his ground, he cemented his status as one of the untouchable legends of the Las Vegas Strip. From that night forward, Vincent Antonelli and Dean Martin maintained a respectful, if distant, truce. They would occasionally cross paths in the smoky restaurants or high-roller suites, exchanging a brief knowing nod. Antonelli even showed up to a few more of Dean's shows, always sitting front and centre, clapping louder than anyone else. Fast forward to 1973, and Vincent Antonelli's luck finally ran out. He was gunned down in a parking lot outside a restaurant in Las Vegas. It was a classic mob execution, the violent result of some internal power struggle within the families that Dean knew nothing about and, frankly, wanted to know nothing about. But when the news reached him, Dean didn't celebrate. He was quoted as saying, "Vincent was a tough character, sure, but he played it straight with me. He was a fair guy. In his own way and by his own code, he was a man of honour." Decades later, whenever interviewers tried to dig up dirt on that night in June 1965, Dean always brushed it off. He would shrug and say, people make too big a deal out of it. I just didn't want some loudmouth in the front row ruining my timing, so I handled it. That is the end of the story. But the people who were actually in the room that night knew better. They knew they had witnessed something incredibly rare. It was a moment where pure nerve and ice-cold composure turned a situation that could have ended in bloodshed into a masterclass in psychology. It was a fleeting moment of mutual respect between two alpha males from two entirely different universes. Dean Martin built his entire empire on the persona of being cool tipsy and unflappable. But that night at the Sands proved that it wasn't just an act for the cameras. He really was that cool. He really was that unflappable. And when the chips were down, he really was that brave. The microphone he offered to Vincent Antonelli that night became a symbol of something much larger than a lounge act. It was Dean's way of drawing a line in the sand, effectively saying, "You want to be the boss? Fine, take the stage, but until you do, I am the one running this show." And Vincent Antonelli, a man who struck fear into the hearts of the toughest criminals in Vegas, had recognised that steel in Dean's spine and respected him for it. That is the real unvarnished story of the night. A Mafia heavyweight threatened Dean Martin on stage and walked away empty-handed. There was no gunfight, no dramatic getaway, just one man refusing to be intimidated and another man deciding to respect him for it. In the end, that is what made Dean Martin a legend. It wasn't just his golden voice or his charm. It was his absolute refusal to bow down to anyone, no matter how powerful or dangerous they claimed to be. Dean Martin was the undisputed king of cool. And on June 18th, 1965, he proved exactly why he wore the crown.